9. William Brock. In March 2024, 81-year-old William Brock of South Charleston, Ohio, was targeted in what is known as a grandparent scam. Someone called him claiming that a relative had been incarcerated and needed money. According to the Clark County Sheriff's Office, the caller turned to threats and a demand for money. In the meantime, 61-year-old rideshare driver Lolitha Hall received a request via the Uber app to pick up a package at a customer's home for delivery elsewhere. She had no idea that Brock had been targeted in a scam, and Brock had no idea who Hall was or that she was on her way to his house. Hall was also unaware that the scammer or the accomplice had made the package pickup request. When Hall arrived, Brock came outside with a gun and demanded to know the scammer's identities. He thought Hall was in on the scam and that she had knowingly come to collect the $12,000 that the scammers were demanding. Brock took Hall's phone and would not let her leave. When she tried to get back into her car, he shot her multiple times. Hall died during emergency surgery, and Brock was charged with murder, assault, and kidnapping. He is currently free on a $200,000 bail as he awaits trial. 8. Richard Montano. In what would turn out to be a disturbing case of mistaken identity, 40-year-old Sylvia Vaca Abake was found brutally murdered in a Fairfax County, Virginia apartment building in August 2022. She had been beaten, stabbed, and set on fire. The suspect, 48-year-old Richard Montano, allegedly killed Sylvia in a case of mistaken identity. According to prosecutors, Richard meant to kill his recent ex-girlfriend, Fatima Villarroyas, who Sylvia was staying with at the time of the murder. Fatima had broken up with Richard just days earlier, following a contentious 8-year relationship. Richard was unaware that Sylvia was staying at the apartment and immediately attacked her when she answered the door. A neighbor heard the victim screaming and dialed 911, and responding officers arrived to find the apartment on fire. The medical examiner who performed Sylvia's autopsy counted at least 10 stab wounds and 10 blunt force injuries. Prosecutors claimed that Richard set the victim's body on fire in an attempt to cover up the crime after realizing he had killed the wrong person. During the trial, Fatima testified that Richard was physically abusive during their relationship. She said that whenever she tried to break up with Richard, he tracked her down and managed to woo her back with flowers and dinner. Fatima took the bait every time, until she decided to break up with Richard for good shortly before Sylvia's murder. As usual, Richard kept coming around, but this time, Fatima blocked his phone number and sent him a final warning to leave her alone. Sylvia moved in with Fatima 2 days after that and was murdered just weeks later. During the trial, Richard's attorney argued that he may have been guilty of having a dysfunctional relationship, but that it did not make him a killer. The lawyer also denied that Richard would have mistaken Sylvia for his ex-girlfriend and claimed that it would make sense for investigators to find his DNA at the scene since he had a history with Fatima. In October 2023, a jury found Richard guilty of first-degree murder and arson. He was sentenced to 2 consecutive life terms. 7. Maria Rodello. When Maria Guadalupe Rodello was pulled over in Tulare, California in May of 2015, it was the second time she had been caught talking on her cell phone while driving. She accused the officer of arresting her without advising her of her Miranda rights and claimed that the officer told her she was under arrest for outstanding misdemeanor and felony warrants, even though she had never been in any major trouble with the law. During the time she spent in jail, Rodello lacked a clear understanding of the charges against her. She was released 3 days later after going before a judge. In a lawsuit against the city of Tulare, Rodello accused the arresting officers of ridiculing her during the booking process. Speaking with ABC 30, she described the experience as horrible and humiliating. Rodello also told the network that when she explained the misunderstanding over the warrants before court, her public defender was shocked. She said the court apologized to her several times after realizing she had no warrants and that the traumatic memory of her wrongful arrest would stick with her forever. The case was ultimately dismissed after the court determined that Rodello had failed to adequately substantiate her allegations against the city and its police officers. While the misunderstanding about the warrants seemed to be possibly true, Rodello's accusations regarding inadequate police training and a superior of the department greenlighting unconstitutional practices simply did not hold up in court. 6. Kevin Mason. 29-year-old Dontavius Catchings was shot dead during a funeral in Minneapolis in June of 2021. The suspected killer remained at large until September 2023, when 28-year-old Kevin Mason was arrested in Indianapolis. Mason was released from custody 2 days later due to what the Marion County Sheriff's Office described as a faulty records review by civilian staff. He quietly fled the state while law enforcement embarked on an equally hushed manhunt. The authorities initially wanted to avoid tipping Mason off to their knowledge that he was mistakenly released, so they decided against going public with their search. In the meantime, they tracked the movements of Mason's girlfriend, Desiree Oliver, who picked him up near the jail. Oliver allegedly obtained a new cell phone for Mason and bought men's underwear, slippers, and a travel kit at a Walmart store. 6 days into their search for Mason, police arrested Oliver on suspicion of assisting a criminal. At around the same time, authorities publicly announced that they believed Mason had fled the state. The case against Oliver was eventually dropped, based on her claim that she had no idea Mason had been wrongfully released from jail. 2 weeks after Mason went on the run, U.S. Marshals tracked him to a residence in Minneapolis and arrested him without incident. He remains in custody at the Hennepin County Jail on charges of premeditated second-degree murder, fleeing in a motor vehicle, and a gun charge. 5. Penny McCarthy. In March of 2024, a half-dozen U.S. Marshals approached 66-year-old Penny McCarthy outside her Phoenix home and arrested her at gunpoint. The agents believed that McCarthy was a 70-year-old wanted fugitive named Carol Ann Rozak, despite her insistence otherwise. McCarthy was taken to a federal prison in Florence, where she was repeatedly strip-searched. She later described the experience as scary as hell during an interview with ABC 15. When questioned about what she thought might have led to the mistake, McCarthy said that the agents had identified her as Rozak based on a photo from her Facebook page. Rozak was wanted on a 25-year-old warrant out of Oklahoma for violating parole. She had previously served prison time for non-violent financial and theft-related crimes. McCarthy never lived in Oklahoma. To make matters even more confusing, the Facebook photo that she said the feds used looked nothing like Rozak. The women have different birthdays, and McCarthy had ample evidence to prove that the authorities had arrested the wrong person. Despite this, she was ordered to return to court for an identity hearing and was told that she had to prove she was not Rozak. Shortly after ABC 15 released the findings of its own investigation into the matter, federal authorities dropped the case against McCarthy. The traumatized senior citizen is now accusing the feds of sweeping the mishap under the rug and trying to quietly make it go away, which she is not going to allow. In the meantime, a U.S. Marshal spokesperson told the outlet that McCarthy's digital fingerprint initially appeared to match Rozak's. The agency admitted that the fingerprints did not match and is reportedly still working to determine what led to the mix-up. 4. Jennifer Sue Hill. 39-year-old Michael Tron Huffaker was minding his own business on a Saturday evening in November of 2020 when he was shot dead along a roadside in Ocklawaha, Florida. The shooter, 41-year-old Jennifer Sue Hill, told a responding Marion County deputy that she thought she saw something black in Michael's hand and believed he was going to shoot her. Michael was rushed to the emergency room with a bullet wound above his right eye. He died from his injuries the next afternoon. A friend of Michael's, who was walking with him along the road at the time of the shooting, told investigators that a white car pulled up near them. Michael went toward the car to figure out what was going on. According to the witness, Jennifer asked Michael for his name. He said Mikey, and a gunshot rang out a moment later. Almost immediately after pulling the trigger, Jennifer realized she had shot the wrong person. She allegedly paced around the crime scene, claiming that she had misidentified Michael as Mikey Beach. About an hour earlier, sheriff's deputies had stopped Michael and his friend and had asked him if he was Michael Beach. They said they had never heard of the man and were free to carry on with their day. Jennifer's daughter told police that the family's home had recently been burglarized, and a man named Michael Beach had been identified as a possible suspect. And while Jennifer claimed Michael had pulled a gun on her following the mistaken identity shooting, witnesses denied the allegation, telling detectives that the victim was not acting in a threatening manner and that he did not appear to have a gun. When questioned about where Michael's weapon was, Jennifer said that someone in a pickup truck had stopped at the scene and snatched his gun, then sped off. Deputies found no evidence to suggest that Michael had been armed, and Jennifer was arrested on suspicion of second-degree murder. She was found guilty by a jury and sentenced to life in prison. 3. Andrew Dean and Jordan Duffy. In October 2021, 55-year-old Andrew Duffy celebrated his upcoming wedding with a stag party at a tavern in the Scottish town of Whitburn. He was joined by his adult sons Dean and Jordan. During the gathering, Andrew identified two men who he believed had knocked his wife's uncle unconscious outside of the bar. In a shocking act of violence that was captured on camera, he and his sons attacked the men, leaving one with a severely broken nose. Disturbing footage captured the moment the other victim was knocked unconscious. Andrew was accused of starting the fight, while Dean and Jordan allegedly punched and kicked the victims. In the video, Jordan could be seen trying to restrain his father, who continued attacking the victims in a fit of rage. Andrew managed to break free from his well-intentioned son's grasp and proceeded to strike one of the victims in the head from behind, causing him to collapse. As if that was not enough damage, Andrew kicked the man as he lay helplessly on the floor. The stag ended with the father and his two sons being arrested for their alleged roles in the assault. In May of 2024, Andrew pleaded guilty to assaulting both victims, while Jordan admitted to attacking one of the victims and Dean admitted to attacking the other. Andrew's defense attorney argued that his client lacked self-control because he was highly intoxicated. Now that he realized he had targeted two completely innocent men, he felt terrible about his actions. He apologized through his lawyer, saying that he felt regretful and deeply ashamed. The judge imposed community sentences on the trio, which meant that they will avoid jail time as long as they abide by certain rules set forth by the court. They were also ordered to compensate the victims in amounts totaling £5,000 and to perform hundreds of hours of community service. 2. Kiana Newsom. George Harris was sitting in his roommate's Chevy Malibu in Memphis, Tennessee's Hickory Hill neighborhood one afternoon in March of 2024 when he was gunned down in cold blood. He was pronounced dead at a nearby hospital. Harris's roommate told detectives that he was the intended target of the crime. Earlier that day, he had argued with his ex-girlfriend, 29-year-old Kiana Newsom. When the roommate arrived home, Harris asked to borrow the car to run an errand. He was killed just minutes later. A nearby video camera captured footage of a Nissan sedan with unique body damage, following the vehicle just minutes before the shooting. Detectives identified the car as Newsom's vehicle and traced it to the home of 32-year-old Justin Howard. Following her arrest the day after the shooting, Newsom allegedly admitted that she and Howard had followed the Malibu. She claimed that Howard pulled out a rifle and shot the victim as she drove past the car. Both Newsom and Howard are now facing a first-degree murder charge and are being held without bail as they await trial.
And now for number 1. But if you want to hear more bizarre and crazy stories, stay tuned after the video for some more content.
1. Brian Ray Shoquist. Shortly before midnight one Saturday in April 2024, California Highway Patrol officers and Sutter County deputies responded to a report of a possible car-to-car shooting. They found two male victims outside a home in Sutter, where the young men claimed they had been invited for a bonfire by their friend, 18-year-old Brian Ray Shoquist. The victims had no idea why they had been shot at. Thankfully, while their rear windshield had been shattered, the men themselves were uninjured. Shoquist allegedly admitted that he fired the shots, but he claimed that he thought he was shooting at someone else who he had gotten into a conflict with earlier that day. The teen explained that someone had threatened him at a racetrack, and that is who he thought was approaching his house when he opened fire. He was arrested on suspicion of multiple charges, including attempted homicide, and remains behind bars with a bail set at $500,000.
13. Zonique Pullins. Zonique Pullins is the daughter of an American singer-songwriter named Tiny Harris and the stepdaughter of rapper T.I. While passing through security one day at Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport in Atlanta one day back in 2020, an X-ray machine picked up a handgun the young woman had in her purse. According to a police report, Pullins had a .38 Ruger semi-automatic pistol. She told TSA agents that she had a gun permit for the weapon, but she allegedly didn't have it on her at the time. Authorities took Pullins into custody on suspicion of carrying a weapon through security and booked her into the Clayton County Jail. She bonded out while dealing with the case. Speaking with People magazine after the arrest, Pullins acknowledged how irresponsible her actions were, but insisted that she had simply made an honest mistake and meant no harm. Luckily, she managed to avoid any jail time, but she was required to abide by certain unspecified conditions in order to get the charges dropped. The judge imposed a $500 fine and 60 hours of community service, and ordered Pullins to go to a gun law training class. 12. Brittany Howard. In early 2017, a 24-year-old mother from Alvin, Texas, named Brittany Howard, got a call from her mom saying that her dad was acting strangely. So Brittany went over to her parents' house, where she discovered her dad in a severely distressed mental state. The worst part about the situation was that he had a gun on him. While trying to intervene, the gun accidentally went off, and Brittany was shot right in the face. She miraculously survived the incident, but faced a long and complicated road toward recovery. Within just 3 weeks after her injury, Brittany underwent the first 3 of at least 6 surgeries she needed. She had a metal plate placed in her forehead after the bullet became lodged 3 centimeters into her frontal lobe, as well as a skin graft put on her nose. Throughout everything, Brittany maintained a positive outlook on life despite her injuries. She told ABC 13 that she harbored no bad feelings toward her father, and that she would prefer to heal from her physical scars than from the emotional pain she would have experienced if she had lost her dad. After the accident, her dad's outlook on life changed entirely, and he no longer found himself in the dark place he was in the day his daughter was shot. Despite Brittany's willingness to forgive her dad and move on, the district attorney charged him with aggravated assault with a weapon of a family member. For the family, it only added on to the struggles they were already dealing with and trying to heal from. While the outcome of her father's criminal case is currently unclear, hopefully Brittany and her loved ones have worked past it and are entering a new chapter of their lives. 11. Derek Boyd. 34-year-old Sandra Boyd was shot in the chest and killed during her birthday celebration with family at their house in Dublin, Ireland during early 2022. She was still clinging to life when Gardaí, Irish police, got there, but soon gave in to her injuries. People at the scene told responding officers that a gunman had entered the home, shot Sandra, and left quickly. The next day, an attorney representing Sandra's 28-year-old brother, Derek Boyd, called investigators and said that his client would give them a statement upon his release from the psychiatric ward. As it turned out, Derek had started fearing for his family's safety in the few weeks leading up to Sandra's party. It all started when he apparently approached a local gangster to ask why his nephew had been assaulted. Instead of resolving the matter right then and there, the disagreement persisted, and the gang member allegedly started threatening to hurt Derek and the rest of his family. In a bid to protect his loved ones, the young man got his hands on an illegal semi-automatic handgun. He was afraid to go outside with it, so when another one of his sisters was leaving Sandra's birthday party, Derek kept the gun in his pocket while he walked her outside. After coming back in, he went to pull the weapon's slide back to eject the bullet in the chamber, but his finger slipped, causing him to accidentally pull the trigger instead. Sandra collapsed, and Derek fell beside her in complete shock, apologizing and begging those around him to help his beloved sister. Someone allegedly told him to run that night, so he did. At which point, the family told authorities the story about an unknown gunman being responsible. When Derek came clean about his role in the shooting, he said he couldn't reveal who he got the gun from because it would put other family members in danger. Derek pleaded guilty to manslaughter, along with unlawful possession of a semi-automatic pistol and ammunition. The court recognized that he was truly sorry and that it was a complicated and strange case. In fact, Derek was left broken by Sandra's death. He wrote in a letter to the court that he regretted obtaining a gun, describing it as the worst mistake he'd ever made. His mother, Teresa Boyd, begged the judge to release her son from prison. She said that Derek would relive the nightmare of Sandra's death every day for the rest of his life, and that the tragedy had already shattered the family. The judge acknowledged that Derek was sorry and that he'll have to live life knowing that he killed his sister, which some might argue is punishment enough. In deciding what to do, the court also considered how Derek's family had forgiven him for the shooting and wanted him to come back home. For these reasons, the judge was willing to show some leniency. But she also thought it was important to consider the seriousness of Derek's decision to take the law into his own hands by getting an illegal gun that he didn't really know how to use. All things considered, he was sentenced to 2 concurrent prison terms, with all but 2 years suspended. It was less than the typical minimum sentence of 5 years, but was still enough of a punishment to stop history from repeating itself in the future. 10. Clint Boyer. On June 5, 2022, former NASCAR driver Clint Boyer was driving home from the Cup Series race at Gateway when he suddenly struck a woman on an exit ramp in Osage Beach, Missouri. He called 911 and stayed at the scene while he waited for officers to arrive. When authorities got to the scene, he helped them find the victim, who was identified as 47-year-old Mary Jane Simmons. Emergency responders failed to revive her, and she was sadly pronounced dead at the scene. All signs pointed towards Simmons' death being an accidental tragedy. Boyer had not a single drop of alcohol in his system, showed no signs of being intoxicated, and worked with the authorities. Among Simmons' possessions, police discovered a bag holding a crystalline substance thought to be meth. After questioning someone at a campground nearby, they learned that she had consumed alcohol and used meth earlier that day, and that she may have been under the influence of drugs at the time of her accident. Although Boyer was cleared of any wrongdoing, accidentally killing a person is a heavy emotional burden to live with. In a statement, the former pro racer extended his condolences to Simmons' loved ones and asked for privacy as he tried to move forward from the tragedy. Many people who unintentionally take another person's life experience an interesting and unique type of guilt, along with other trauma as they try to forgive themselves for something that wasn't necessarily their fault. 9. Pub workers poison patron. During the summer of 2007, 39-year-old Fran Nicol and her partner were drinking at a bar near Dundee, Scotland, when she took a sip of what was supposed to be a fizzy rum drink and immediately felt an excruciating burning sensation in her mouth, throat, and organs. An employee mistook a bottle of caustic pipe cleaning solution, sodium hydroxide, as the apple juice that went into Fran's drink. The potentially deadly substance had somehow ended up in a juice bottle inside the bar's fridge, and the staff member who prepared the drink didn't take a close enough look to realize. Fran immediately collapsed to the floor in agonizing pain and struggled to breathe. She was rushed to the hospital in critical condition, where doctors realized that her throat was swollen and covered in blisters to the point that it almost closed up. While medical personnel fought as hard as they could to save Fran's life, police shut down the pub and investigated the incident. The business reopened a few days later, and nobody was ever charged. All the employees denied putting the cleaner into a juice container, or ever putting the juice container in the fridge. The injuries were severe, leaving Fran unable to chew, eat, or swallow, as she endured multiple surgeries to repair the damage done to her throat. She lost an alarming amount of weight. For a while, she was placed on a feeding tube because she simply had no other choice. She slowly regained her ability to ingest food, but it took quite a long time. At one point, Fran even became so emaciated that her family started to worry that she'd starve to death. A year after the disturbing mix-up, nobody had been held responsible for the mistake that almost cost Fran her life. She told the Scottish Daily Record that she didn't think anyone poisoned her on purpose and that she wasn't out for blood by any means. But she believed that someone knew exactly how the cleaner got into a juice container and into the fridge. At the very least, she believed the pub seriously violated health and safety laws and should have been punished. Fran hired a lawyer in hopes of getting to the bottom of the mystery about what led up to the poisoning, but it's unclear whether she got the answers she was looking for. It would be an understatement to say the circumstances surrounding the incident don't add up. 8. Florida cop hit by friendly fire. After receiving a Crime Stoppers tip about a suspect who was wanted for not appearing in court on a meth charge, 4 Polk County deputies traveled to a trailer home to serve a warrant on October 4th, 2022. Hoping to arrest 46-year-old Cheryl Lynn Williams, a sergeant and 2 deputies went inside the trailer at around 3:15 in the morning, while 21-year-old Deputy Blaine Lane stayed in a tactical position outside. He kept his eyes on the front door and windows just in case Williams tried to escape. As the 3 law enforcement officers inside the trailer looked for the suspect, she suddenly came into view while holding a BB gun. She allegedly started firing at the cops, who returned fire. 2 of the 6 shots that were fired hit Williams, while Lane was shot in the arm and chest. He radioed for help and was rushed to a hospital nearby, where he died from his injuries. An investigation found Lane was actually struck by a bullet from one of his fellow deputies' guns. Polk County Sheriff Grady Judd described the incident as both tragic and sad, specifically noting that Lane had only worked in law enforcement for a short time. He entered the police academy back in 2021 and joined the sheriff's department officially in January 2022, less than 10 months before his death. Williams survived her gunshot wounds, and although Lane was killed thanks to friendly fire, the woman can be held liable for his death according to Florida law. Williams was charged with 13 felonies, including second-degree murder of a law enforcement officer, 3 counts of aggravated assault on a law enforcement officer, 3 counts of being a felon in possession of a firearm, 3 counts of resisting arrest, 2 counts of being a convicted felon in possession of ammunition, and 1 count of methamphetamine possession. After getting treatment for her injuries, Williams was transferred to the Polk County Jail, where she remains behind bars to this day while awaiting her next court date. 7. Deadly drunk driving prank. On April 5, 2023, law enforcement officers were sent out to a parking lot in Missoula, Montana, after getting a report about a truck recklessly doing donuts and striking a pedestrian, pinning the victim between 2 cars. Emergency responders arrived and found bystanders trying to perform CPR on 66-year-old Raimundo Tesoro. They took over in hopes of saving the man's life. Despite their best efforts, Tesoro ended up passing away from his injuries. According to a probable cause affidavit, there was a man at the scene crying on the ground and saying he killed his friend. He identified himself as 49-year-old Greg Andrew Hancock and allegedly admitted that he had a few beers when he decided to spin a few circles in the parking lot. Hancock saw Tesoro and decided to mess with him by driving toward him. But when he hit the brakes, his truck slid straight into the victim, pinning Doe against another truck and killing him. The affidavit states that Hancock showed multiple signs of intoxication during field sobriety tests. He refused to take a breathalyzer and was eventually taken into custody, at which point police obtained a warrant to draw his blood for alcohol testing. Investigators observed that the scene was full of beer cans and noticed a strong smell of alcohol coming from the group of people Hancock and Tesoro were drinking with. Based on evidence at the scene and several witness reports, they concluded that the group drank together after going skiing on a hill nearby. Tesoro faces 1 count of vehicular homicide in connection to his friend's death. He's currently free on a $100,000 bond, while he awaits the next steps in his case. If convicted, he could face up to 30 years in prison, as well as a $50,000 fine. Some might say that it's hard not to feel at least a tiny bit bad for Hancock, even if he was acting recklessly. After all, it's probably safe to assume that he didn't mean to kill his friend, and he seemed pretty upset over the situation. At the same time, it's also likely that he knowingly broke laws and that his behavior played a major role in the tragedy. 6. Jeremy Herwig. While responding to reports of gunfire in Johns Island, South Carolina, one night in July 2022, Charleston police discovered 23-year-old Ezekiel Denyu suffering from a gunshot wound inside the bedroom of a local house. A woman who was at the scene told officers that she was hanging out with Ezekiel and the man who lived at the home, 25-year-old Jeremy Herwig. They were sitting on the bed and were about to play a game when Herwig suddenly pulled a silver gun out of his drawer. Just a few moments later, the woman heard a gunshot and saw blood on her clothes. When she looked over at the victim, she realized he'd been struck. Denyu passed away from his injuries despite emergency responders' attempts to save him. During questioning, Herwig said that he and his friends had spent the day drinking and playing video games. Earlier in the day, he thought he unloaded his gun. When he picked the weapon up later on, Herwig thought it was empty, only to realize his fatal mistake when the pistol went off in his lap. According to investigators, though, the gun was fully loaded with a single empty shell casing in the chamber. Authorities concluded that Herwig acted with reckless disregard and negligence and charged him with involuntary manslaughter. The judge set his bail at $50,000 and banned him from possessing or obtaining any firearms before the outcome of the case is resolved. Herwig claimed that he shot his friend by accident, but a victim advocate who went to his bond hearing told the court that Ezekiel Denyu's mom believes Herwig is dangerous. The details about why she feels this way have yet to be revealed, as the case continues to work its way through the justice system. 5. Florida police kill beloved pet. Florida is home to a wide variety of invasive species that are constantly impacting the ecosystem in negative ways. But the Burmese python is one of the biggest invasive species, not only in the state, but the whole world. Experts first documented a wild population of the snake in the Everglades back in 2000. Ever since then, the Fish and Wildlife Commission has continuously waged war against the massive reptiles, which can grow up to 15 feet, or 4.6 meters in length, weigh over 200 pounds, 90.7 kilograms, and eat any and everything in their path. Burmese pythons reproduce quickly, thrive in Florida's subtropical environment, and have been decimating native wildlife. In 2021, state authorities declared the Burmese python a prohibited species, which means that they're not allowed to be pets. Commercial breeders were given a 5-month deadline to get rid of their snakes. After that, anyone caught with one in their possession would potentially face criminal charges, and the pythons themselves would possibly be euthanized. In February 2022, the FWC charged commercial breeder Chris Coffey for not getting rid of his 34 Burmese pythons before the deadline was up. He entered a misdemeanor diversion program and paid $250 to forego community service requirements, and the case was later dropped. Although the FWC had technically confiscated his snakes and refused to give him extra time to locate homes for them, the reptiles remained in Coffey's warehouse in Broward County, and he kept caring for them as they faced an uncertain future. While responding to an unrelated report near the warehouse in April 2023, FWC officers offered to euthanize Coffey's remaining 34 Burmese pythons for him. He later told USA Today that he initially agreed to the offer, but when he saw how the officers were using a bolt gun to shoot the snakes in the head, he could no longer watch. So he decided to leave the room. Coffey also claimed that he told the officers not to kill his pet boa constrictor, which is not a prohibited species, but that they failed to listen to his request. Footage posted to YouTube by the United States Association of Reptile Keepers seemed to show 2 wildlife officers with shocked looks on their faces after realizing they'd accidentally killed the boa constrictor, Big Shirl, who was pregnant with 32 babies at the time. In the background, Coffey could be heard yelling, "Oh my God, why?" Someone said it was a mistake, and Coffey yelled back, "How? I reminded you 10 times." The FWC has decided not to comment on Big Shirl's death, but said that the Burmese pythons belonging to Coffey and his business partner, Bill McAdam, had been relinquished to them. In the meantime, Coffey, McAdam, and other reptile enthusiasts have asked that the FWC be held responsible for what some are calling a severe overreach of authority. And while the new law banning Burmese pythons received massive support, some are calling the incident a needless slaughter instead of euthanasia. 4. Lucy Quirk. In October 2021, 38-year-old Lucy Quirk spent a night out drinking in Chesterfield, England with her boyfriend John Wright to celebrate his upcoming 28th birthday. After spending a few hours at a pub, Quirk drove Wright home. Surveillance footage showed Quirk's car sitting idly in the road as Wright got out of the vehicle and walked right in front of it. He either fell or was knocked over, and unfortunately, Quirk failed to notice him, driving straight over his head, mistaking it for a traffic cone. It wasn't until she saw her boyfriend laying in the middle of the road with catastrophic head injuries that she realized something terrible had happened. Quirk screamed out for help, yelling that Wright was dead. According to at least one nearby witness, she claimed that her boyfriend had somehow thrown himself in front of her car. Wright was immediately rushed to the hospital with a fractured skull, fractured ribs, and a lacerated liver. He passed away from his injuries. Meanwhile, police gave a breathalyzer test to Quirk, who blew almost twice the legal limit. During questioning, she reportedly said that she planned to leave her car at the bar, but the plans changed while she was intoxicated. Quirk said she didn't see Wright walk around the front of her car, and that she thought she had run over a cone that he threw at the vehicle. Quirk pleaded guilty to causing death by careless driving and was sentenced to 15 months in prison. 3. Tyler Wayne Pierce. After finishing up their shifts at a call center in Portland, Oregon one night back in 2019, a pair of 30-year-old best friends named Tyler Wayne Pierce and Justin Stewart decided to go bar hopping together. They went home on foot around 2:30 a.m. after a night out drinking and were very intoxicated. As most people know, this is one of the worst times to handle a gun. In fact, many people argue that it's downright dangerous for a person to carry a firearm while drinking at all. But Pierce had a 9mm semi-automatic handgun in his waistband. Despite not having a concealed weapons permit, he bought the weapon about a month before, and he decided during the walk home that it was the perfect time to take it out. Thinking the pistol was unloaded, Pierce put it up to Stewart's chin and pulled the trigger as a joke. I probably don't have to tell you what happened next. As you can imagine, the gun actually was loaded, and Stewart died from his injuries. The horrifying tragedy was captured on surveillance footage from a nearby home. Pierce had a blood alcohol content of 0.16, which is twice the legal limit for driving in the state of Oregon. He told police that he knew there were bullets in the gun's magazine, but that he didn't think there was any ammunition left inside the chamber. After going his whole life with no criminal convictions, Pierce faced potential prison time for taking someone's life. In December 2021, he pleaded guilty to second-degree manslaughter with a firearm and was given a 6.5-year prison sentence. At his sentencing, Pierce apologized for his actions and said that he'll feel guilt and shame after what happened for the rest of his life. He told the court that the harm he caused was unintentional, but that the hurt was real. He said he would take Stewart's place in a heartbeat if he could. His remorse failed to sway Stewart's mother, who accused Pierce of being a murderer. She said the killing was no accident at all, and that Pierce had stolen the family's lives away from them by taking their son. Multnomah County Circuit Judge Eric Dolan cited the case as a reminder that guns aren't toys, and that they shouldn't be handled by someone who's been drinking. Some mistakes are impossible to forgive because of the damage they cause, even if the person responsible didn't mean to cause any harm. 2. Misty Williams. During the morning one day in 2008, someone found 23-year-old Jeremy S. Whaley lying motionless in the middle of a street in Bloomington, Indiana. The surprised passerby ran to a neighbor's house and quickly called 911. By the time police got there, around 3:30 in the morning, Whaley was already dead. His injuries were consistent with having been run over by a car. Further investigation revealed that Whaley and his girlfriend, 23-year-old Misty Williams, had gone out drinking earlier that night with a close friend. After going home, they got into a fight, so Whaley left to cool down on a walk. When he failed to come back home, Williams got into her car and drove around the neighborhood looking for him. At some point, she realized she had accidentally run over someone. Instead of sticking around to deal with the situation, she instead decided to flee. Authorities soon caught her and charged her with operating a vehicle while intoxicated, resulting in death, and leaving the scene of an accident. They concluded that Whaley had most likely passed out in the street while drunk, and said that while the investigation was ongoing, they did not have any reason to believe Williams intentionally ran over her boyfriend. Neither Whaley nor Williams had a criminal record, and there was no history of domestic violence between the two. Not everyone was as quick to believe that the incident was a simple mistake. Kathy Rainey, who called 911 for the man who found Whaley, told local news station WTHR that another man showed up at the scene right after the Good Samaritan knocked on her front door. The two men briefly spoke, with one asking if the other ran the victim over, to which he responded, "No, I didn't." One of the men rushed off after saying he was going to get someone else, and he never returned to the scene. While it's unclear how the situation played out later on, the case largely disappeared from the headlines after it was first reported on, suggesting that it was dealt with. 1. Friendly fire in Fallujah. One of the worst cases of friendly fire among United States Marines in recent decades happened in Fallujah, Iraq on April 12, 2004. Someone accidentally fired an 81mm mortar, blowing up a schoolhouse that was temporarily operating as a military base. 2 Marines and an Iraqi interpreter were killed, and 12 others were wounded in the aftermath. It was immediately clear that the deadly blast was a huge mistake. But nobody was ever disciplined, and the truth about what happened was kept secret for years, from the families of the men who died. According to National Public Radio, relatives were initially told that the Marines were killed from enemy fire. They were unaware that an investigation was being carried out or that it concluded 4 months after the explosion. It wasn't until 3 years later that the fallen soldiers' families learned the truth of their loved ones' deaths. And even then, the disaster remained shrouded in mystery. Even some of the survivors still don't know the full truth about what happened. In 2023, a 7-part NPR podcast called Taking Cover shed some unprecedented light on what happened in Fallujah that day. It was released after an investigation that began when NPR Pentagon correspondent Tom Bowman got a tip that the mortar strike was caused by friendly fire, and that it was covered up because a powerful politician's son was involved in the incident. First Lieutenant Duncan D. Hunter is the son of former U.S. Representative Duncan Hunter Sr. At the time of the explosion, Duncan Hunter Jr. was working in the command center that mistakenly approved the launch. Duncan Hunter Sr. was serving as the chairman of the House Armed Services Committee as well. A years-long NPR investigation uncovered evidence indicating that there really may have been a massive cover-up. And it may have been to shield Duncan Hunter Jr. and others from facing consequences for the mistake that cost 2 Marines their lives and forced at least 3 others into an early retirement. The findings indicate that while the mortar attack was approved by the battalion commander, Duncan Hunter Jr. allegedly pointed to the wrong target on the map. This detail is missing from official reports, which found 3 other military members responsible, although charges against them were dropped. Nobody seems willing to admit to Hunter's mistake on the record, and the battalion commander changed his story to say that another officer made the mistake Hunter was accused of. Bowman believes that Hunter got off with a deadly mistake scot-free. But for now, this officially remains a matter of speculation and not fact.
Thanks for watching. Would you rather print the wrong address on invites to an important party and not notice until the day of the event? Or accidentally call your current partner by your ex's name repeatedly over the course of an entire week? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe. See you soon.